So I'm going to be covering two issues here, which I've certainly covered before and are likely to provoke some people. But I've always taken an approach on this channel of not really having any self-censorship. I don't think anything is too taboo to talk about. Um, some things I'm more interested in than others, so I'll likely talk about more. But this is sort of touching on things, like I say, I've spoken about before, but I often do this. I'll go back to an old subject, not because I've changed my mind, but sometimes it's just interesting to have another video where I myself can look and say, well, that was an angle I didn't quite approach before, or I covered this, I didn't cover that. Um, yeah, so I also think the other videos tend to be more about one subject or the other, whereas this is kind of amalgamating both a little bit. Um, as I would say with all my videos, before commenting, all I ask is you hear me out a little bit. I don't expect you to watch the whole video. I know my videos are quite long, probably on average, say about 20 minutes on average, but I just think it's necessary to talk about. I don't believe in doing these little snapshot videos of 2 minutes or whatever, it's not what I'm about, and I don't think I can effectively cover any given subject in that time. So, if you like this channel and you want to watch the whole videos, I suggest multitask, do the dishes or something while you're watching this. I often do it myself on other channels. If I'm listening to someone, I'll just multitask. So, without further ado, feminism and the trans issue. These are both very hot button topics, particularly the latter in recent years. Um, Very basically, to summarize both my positions, or my positions on both issues consecutively, I don't call myself a feminist, I'm an egalitarian. But I basically agree with the principles of feminism, equality for women and girls. I think that's a very noble and important thing. Um, and I think the most progressive countries in the world value women's rights. Nowhere in the world is the situation perfect, and in many parts of the world it is a downright human rights challenge. But yeah, I think it's definitely a worthwhile principle. That having been said, I do feel, and I felt for a very long time, that Western third wave feminism is has long not really been about equality. It's long been about equality plus. And I'm not going to get into a huge big thesis in this video about why I feel that to be the case, but basically, I think with first wave feminism, it was about basic rights like the right to vote. Second wave feminism was more about issues in the workplace. And there's some crossover here, of course. Third wave feminism, not totally illegitimate, but I think it's starting to get into another domain. We might even be saying a sort of fourth wave feminism now, where it's no longer just about men and women should be equal and women should have the same opportunities as men. It's become something else. And I do think there is misandry, unquestionably misandry within feminist ranks. The reason I don't call myself a feminist is because I believe in men's rights too. So I think egalitarian sums that up more. I believe in human rights. Um, I abhor abuse of women, but I also do not agree with this idea that women should get special treatment. And I think some feminists, whilst preaching egalitarianism, I think they basically are asking for special treatment. They'll never admit it, but I think they are. Or they will present a situation that affects both genders, both sexes, I should say, and you'll see why that's important given the next subject matter. But something that affects both sexes, and then just single men out. Um, I don't want to sound like I'm beating a bush here, but you know, or going in circles. But there isn't a day goes by when you won't see in a national newspaper an article written by a feminist journalist bemoaning men over some issue or another. If a male columnist was to write the same thing, he'd be immediately denounced as a misogynist. I think actually is a word that's thrown around a bit too much. It does exist, but I think it's thrown around. And it's for me the most galling thing is just the double standards. Um, this isn't to say that women don't have areas that they are more disproportionately affected than men, because they do. But I've news for feminists. Men also have areas where they're more disproportionately affected, and I can, go through them, but it would take all day to microanalyze these things. And ultimately, I just think the whole battle of the sexes can be really tiresome. And I like women, probably over half my friends are women, so it's not coming from a point of not trusting women or something like that. I just think that the divisiveness comes from, basically saying we demand equality, but let's talk about the plight of women in prison, not equal responsibility and issues like that. This isn't to say every feminist thinks alike. Of course they don't. Like any movement, any ideology, the schools of thought within. Um, I've come across feminists in my own life that I've got on well with, and I think are very reasonable, rational people. I've also come across some feminists who are basically little girls who need to grow up, and they just have a chip on their shoulder about men. Maybe one guy treated them badly, and they just have a chip on their shoulder about men in general. It gets rather tiresome, and I don't think it's a very productive way of building bridges. You don't convince men to your argument by shaming all men collectively, as some feminists do. You don't convince men to your argument um, by saying it's terrible if men do it, but we're going to excuse it when it's women doing it. And I think one high-profile example of this is the Heard death trial last year. Feminists for years have been talking about why women should be protected from domestic violence. And of course they should. That's a terrible thing. But why is it when the perpetrator is a woman, they will actually, talk about the patriarchy and the misogyny of her being condemned? So the double standards are rather galling. Um, and I think that's the most toxic thing that comes from third wave feminism. Now, that having been said, an interesting thing has happened in recent years, and it is that the more the trans lobby is pushing its narrative, the more we are seeing some very upside down situations, some very absurd propositions. Um, the more I find myself actually agreeing with those so-called TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists. Um, it's a funny situation because in other circumstances I might find them, quite arrogant and I wouldn't agree with them. But I do think they're onto something with this. I do think that they genuinely feel women are being erased, and I think that when you start to look at the way trans dogma is going, I think they're correct. So that is an area where I agree with feminists because I think that they have legitimate concerns about that. Um, I mean, if you look at someone like J.K. Rowling, who's a high-profile woman and a high-profile feminist, I would not say she was ever that militant. She was certainly not an Andrea Dworkin. But she was a self-described feminist, as many public women are, and because she has insisted in the importance of biology, she has been vilified for years as a transphobe. And you even get a situation now where there's Harry Potter conventions where the very woman who created the whole universe of Harry Potter is erased. Um, I do think there's something rather sinister about the way trans activists are conducting themselves, and I think there's something sinister about the way, ironically though, this can also be seen, you know, with feminist activism, because there will be some, particularly men's rights activists, who will say, "Well, feminists are getting a bit of a taste of their own medicine." For the years they screamed at men and they shamed men and they vilified men, and now trans activists are doing the same thing with women who oppose them. It might be tempting to think that way, but we have to be consistent. We have to stand up for what's right. Simple as that. So whether it be, feminists trying to silence Will Nolan, that is the professor who spoke about, the The patriarchy paradox was the name of his lecture at Eton College. There were feminists who were trying to silence him. Whether it be that, or whether it be militant trans activists who are trying to silence women like Posey Parker in New Zealand, right is right and wrong is wrong, and common sense must be defended. I will always stand up for women who are being bullied unfairly so. Well, all bullying is wrong, but especially in a situation where it's a case of simply standing up for common sense. So I'm going to put my cards on the table. I do not believe that biological men can ever be women. I just don't. I think that people who suffer from gender dysphoria um, are on a journey that we should empathize with, we should sympathize with. But I don't think, particularly with young people who are going through this, particularly children, I don't think it is actually compassionate to say, well, you're experiencing this problem, so we're just going to say, go for a surgery. Have a situation where children are being given puberty blockers, where young women, young teenage girls, are basically having their breasts flattened, and things that are pretty uncomfortable to talk about. But this is happening, um, and there's no reversal. You know, the group Binary on Facebook. It's a lobby group in defense of biology, basically, as the name implies. They really, really make a lot of very valid points on this. Um, Dr. Deborah So, in the United States, she, I think, has some very good takes on this. And these are not people motivated by hatred. These are people who have seen the effects of, people who have regretted their transition. But this is not to say that everyone does. But I do think there is something very, very intolerant about the current trans dogma. And, those militant activists don't represent all trans people. But we have to, as a society, say, of course, people shouldn't be bullied. People shouldn't be mocked for going through gender dysphoria. But if indeed they are diagnosed that way, but there has to come a point where basic facts matter more than feelings. And you can play semantics with this. You can angle it a lot of ways, but fundamentally, I mean, an example of this would be I was assigned the wrong birth. So this sort of implies some sort of plot by doctors and midwives to give someone the wrong gender, despite the fact that they will see if they've got male genitalia or female genitalia. Very, very, very rarely you will get intersex people, but that's I don't know what the statistic is, but I think it's incredibly rare. The vast majority of people are men and women, and as someone recently pointed out on the group Binary, the current world population is 8,025,000,000 was when they checked that. They must have got that from Worldometer, because it's pretty precise. I mean, it takes all the world's data, all the world's censuses, and puts them together. Well, it's as precise as it can be. Anyway, and it made the point, every single one of those people were born from a woman. Now, there's people who come from artificial insemination and an IVF treatment and a range of other things. But only women can give birth. When it comes to human beings, only women can give birth. So when we see reports like transgender man gives birth, what that really means is a biological woman who had a transition gave birth. But this matters, it's Keir Starmer has tried to wriggle his way out of this, and it matters. He said recently the vast majority of people don't care about the subject. He's half right. It's true. The vast majority of people don't want to, think that issues like this are more important than crime and rising food prices and all of that. But it does matter when he is effectively saying the 99% of women don't have penises. By definition, in a country where there's over 30 million women, Keir Starmer believes that some women do. In fact, thousands of them. Now, that's a clear dividing line between Starmer and Sunak. Um, so I'm going to wrap this up, but basically, it, I find myself, as a straight man. I'm not a cis man, I'm a man, right? I'm a biological man. That's an absurd word that's been invented by the trans lobby. Um, For all the thing about labeling, they seem perfectly happy to call people cis. And I'm not offended by it, I just think it's silly. It has no meaning, right? But regardless, I mean, there's so many things to be said about the subject. Let's look at the acronyms, right? If you really go down the path of saying, well, to be inclusive, let's say LGBTQ plus IA plus whatever it is. Now, from a purely practical point of view, you cannot you cannot read out, say, a company's mission statement or hospital guidelines, whatever it is, and use such an acronym every time because it just gets absurd. There's almost no acronym in the world like that. Think of the well-known ones: NATO, right? North Atlantic Treaty Organization, WHO, World Health Organization, UN, United Nations. Generally speaking, they're short for a reason, so that they're memorable. Okay, this actually gets into the basic um, practicalities of linguistics and how we communicate. It's not a trivial thing, actually. Um, and what I find a little bit galling is anyone who raises these things is immediately vilified as a transphobe and promoting hatred. Um, and it's quite manipulative arguments like, oh, they're not hurting anyone but themselves. Well, or they're not hurting anyone, that's the line. But here's the thing, when you start looking at the issue of women's prisons, when you start looking at competitive sport, when you start looking at a lot of other factors, that is why the trans issue stands out from LGB and why the LGB alliances went a separate direction, because they recognize it is different. It is fundamentally different. Um, and they, of course, have been, attacked as transphobes. Why? Because lesbian women don't want to be pressured to say that they like biological men just because these biological men say that they're women. So ironically, we're seeing a situation where lesbian women are being bullied because they won't pander to this narrative. It really is absurd. Um, and I am concerned about the use of legislation in this regard, where if you mispronounce someone, you could be potentially get a police knock on the door. It's actually quite sinister and Orwellian. Now, I don't favour bullying people. Let's say you have a trans person. The recent case with Dylan Mulvaney, some alt-right type was following them around, and firing questions in their face. I don't think that's necessary. It is harassment, and it's just unnecessary. Um, so I condemn bullying of anyone. But I am pretty disgusted the way militant trans activists think they have a right to hurl misogynistic abuse at women, to violently threaten women. Now, we hear this line about men need to step up. Well, here it is. I'm a man. I'm stepping up and I'm saying that it's damn wrong. And I'll say this. Any woman in my life, if I saw her treated like that, absolutely I would not be standing by and saying nothing. And if that means being called a transphobe, so be it. I just think that there has to be a basic respect for common sense, you know, um, and I think that's going out the window in place of feelings and sentiments. I'll just briefly mention this because it's been in the news. Apparently, a teacher, someone in South, I believe, was basically told to apologise to their students because they said, "Good afternoon, girls." Now, this was in a girls' school, and the teacher was told to apologise because apparently the students took issue with it because one of the students didn't self describe themselves as a girl. Now, this is absurd. It's absolutely absurd. As Esther Krakow said on GB News, I believe it was, this is a situation where students are taking over. That should not be allowed to happen. Um, and this isn't right wing reactionary. It's just common bloody sense. So what I would say is I do not believe that men can be women, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go to a trans woman. They have their legal rights to be recognized as a trans woman, but I'm not going to go to them and use the wrong pronoun just out of spite. But at the same time, I refuse to be told you have to agree with this. You have to believe that, this is my truth, even though I'm suffering from a mental health problem. Because if you have a situation where someone is schizophrenic, or they believe, they're hearing voices, or they believe that they are, they've multiple personality disorder, you don't have, you don't diagnose that by sort of pandering to them. Or take it another example, if you have an alcoholic, and people might say this is way off, but if you have an alcoholic, you don't sort of help them by giving them alcohol. So to me, this idea that if someone is suffering from gender dysphoria, they should immediately be encouraged to mutilate themselves, to basically have gender reassignment surgery, which has real risks, especially with young people. And in an increasing number of cases, people are regretting this and there's no way to turn back. Um, I really think there are moral questions around this. Now, I accept that in some cases, maybe in many cases, they will genuinely feel happier in their new body. And, who am I to deny them that happiness? Who am I to say they can't have that? So, fine, call yourself a woman, have the gender reassignment surgery, but do not demand that everyone else sees it that way. Do not demand that women have to accept you as another woman because you're a trans woman. Legally, you're a trans woman. You're not a woman. You'll never be the same as a biological woman. So in this sense, I'm with the TERFs. I'm with the trans exclusionary radical feminists. And that's pretty much my take on both subjects. In this world, if you take a position on anything, you're going to annoy some people. So I know with this video, I will have annoyed some feminists and I will have annoyed some trans people. Maybe more than annoyed. Maybe, they'll be frothing it right now and saying this guy's full of hate. This guy's spewing out. I just think that these are issues that are in society that directly impact legislation, that directly impact public discourse, and that's my take on them. And I'm simply exercising my freedom of expression in offering my take. No one has to agree with me. But I think there's many others who feel the same way. Okay, thanks for watching.